Hey there, welcome to saas.unbound, brought to you by saas.group. I'm your host, and Dana, and this is the show where we chat with inspiring founders and experts to get an inside scoop on how they made their business a success. And today with me is Mike, a solo founder of Sidekiq, a Ruby framework to perform background jobs. That tells me nothing, to be honest, so I'm going to ask you what Sidekiq does. But launched in 2012, completely bootstrapped, and originally an open source project that's already hitting about 5 million in ARR. So super impressive. Really, really interested in how you're doing, why you're doing it, and yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Anna. Great to be here.
Sure, awesome, anytime. So yeah, let's maybe perform a mom test on me. What is Sidekiq? What does it do?
Oh, I think you summarized it great right there. Yeah, it is at the heart of it. It's a developer tool for you know for basically building out and scaling Ruby applications. So if you're using the Ruby programming language to build business applications, Sidekiq is the leading framework for scaling the processing of that business app across many machines. So as you grow your business, as you have more data that you need to ingest and process, people will use Sidekiq as the framework for creating jobs to process those elements of data. So I know that's a very nebulous sort of way of describing it, but let me give you an example of
Yeah.
to maybe make it a little more concrete. Let's say you get a CSV file, like a comma separated value file,
Mhm.
full of a bunch of transactions, right? Maybe you get 10,000 lines to process, right? What you would do with Sidekiq is you would create a job for each line in that file, and then you would fan that work out across many machines, and you could process it in a matter of seconds or minutes. Um,
Hmm.
and so that way you would scale that processing to as widely as you have the resources for. But I don't want to get too down into the weeds. The secret to Sidekiq is I've been iterating on it for, as you say, a decade now, and I've polished the heck out of it. So it has a nice, really usable web interface for developers so that they can see all the data going through their system, so that they can see failures and they can respond to errors that are happen when they're processing their jobs. So yeah, it's kind of got the whole, and of course, to, as you said, it started out as an open source project. But when I started the project, I explicitly said I want to do some financial experiments because a free, purely open source project is not sustainable in the long run,
Yeah.
right? As I mentioned, I've been working on this for a decade now. Well, if it was free, I couldn't work on it for the past decade, right? I would have given up and burnt out. Um, so the money and the commercial side is what keeps the open source project going. It's what keeps it
Mhm.
well maintained and me responding to support emails every day. So the open source and the commercial side kind of dovetail nicely together um, to keep the product and the project going.
Mhm. Okay, so you kind of moved on to being just a very expensive customer support. All right, but well, I gotta say, when I read the name Sidekick, I thought, oh, that's just brilliant because everyone wants to be, the main actor, and I think naming a product Sidekick just requires a bit of the guts. So yeah, really thumbs up for
Well,
that.
yeah, the name, yeah, well, the name is kind of it comes from the fact that with a Ruby business application, typically you'll use a web framework to build the web, sort of interface to the app. And then on the side, you'll have a framework for processing data and those jobs that I talked about. And so that's where the name Sidekiq came from. Is I said, well, it's kind of the sidekick to that main web framework that you're using for your
Yeah.
application, right? So in the Ruby world, you've got web frameworks like Ruby on Rails, like Hanani, like Sinatra, and so Sidekiq is the sidekick to that web framework that you're also using. So that's where the name came from.
Yeah, pretty cool. Okay, thank you. Thank you for telling this. But yeah, since you're already kind of started talking about how you started it and the way you monetize the product, let's maybe get to like the whole inspiration. How did you start it in the first place? Because it's something that I don't know, not
Yeah.
so obvious. It's not your usual sauce, right? So yeah, where did the inspiration come from?
Well, so I was a Ruby developer for 5 years before I started Sidekiq. Um, and the one thing that I did at all the different startups that I worked at in and programmed Ruby at was I would always build a background job system because there was no really usable background job framework for Ruby at the time. A lot of there was a bunch of homegrown stuff and there was stuff that worked okay. But every single system had issues or sort of scalability limits. And so after the third time of this, I thought, well, maybe I should, maybe, I've built it 3 times already. Maybe I should build one that I think is long term going to work really well for the community. And that's why I started Sidekiq, and I sort of announced it on my blog, and I said I'm going to build this thing because Ruby doesn't have a really solid dependable framework that's sort of well packaged and easy to use. And so that's where it came from. I said there's obviously a need in the community for this thing. But then I also said, if I'm going to build this thing and a lot of people are going to adopt it, I'm going to need to be able to work on it for years. And that's where the whole financial experiment side of it came in. I realized as a longtime open source developer that open source projects get started with a lot of gusto, but then they usually die after a
Yeah.
couple of years because people just burn out. They spend so many hours and so much time working on this thing and supporting their users for $0. And so I didn't want that to happen to me also. So that's where I said I want to make a commercial side to it.
Right. But also like another side to building something open source is that you have all the contributors that could maybe potentially also become your co-founders maybe, right? Or just your employees. So that hasn't happened to you. You're still alone after well, not alone. You're working on the product by yourself, or at least the commercial side of it. You've launched Sidekiq 7.0, right? So how much of it is purely you, right? How much of it is it the contributors, if any, if that's, that's still going. So what's the deal? What was it then? What is it now?
Right, right. So there's a couple aspects to that question. When I started in 2012, a lot of people were excited by the project. I was
Hmm.
pretty well known in the community already. And so a lot of people came on board and started helping me flesh things out. Like the web UI, for instance, I'm a terrible designer. I don't do CSS or JavaScript very well at all. So I had a bunch of people help me out with the design, um, the sort of red coloring and the logo and all that kind of stuff. That was all contributed by people. So I'm really thankful to them, obviously, for their work. Um, so a lot of people initially came on board and helped submitting pull requests to improve functionality, to add new features, that sort of thing. I was sort of as the beneficial dictator for life, or anyways, the dictator for life of the project. I would sort of coordinate and I would review and that sort of thing. But I had a lot of committers in Sidekiq for the first couple of years. I probably had a dozen people with
Hmm.
commit access to Sidekiq. But over the years, people change teams, they move companies, they have new life goals or whatever, and they move on. And so, the only constant in the last decade has been me, because I'm the one strand that's keeping everything together. And you're right. Today, I'm still the one doing 90% of the work. But I do have people submitting pull requests to me all the time to improve things. I was just working with someone earlier this week on a change to Sidekiq, and reviewing his pull request and helping him make it as good as possible. So I still do open source work every day. Now, the commercial side, I still, you're right, that is closed source because it is what's called an open core system. So the core is open source, but the commercial side is closed source, and you have to pay for access to that. But that's just the trade-off you have to making a sustainable system, and to having sort of financial support to the product, is I chose the open core model as my business model.
Yeah. Okay. So after a couple of years, you decided to monetize it, or was it like kind of in the works earlier? And how did you start even? Like, who were your first
Yeah.
customers? How did you find them? And how did you price the product in the first place? Too many questions. Sorry.
Well, no. It's a great question. I get where you're coming from. The open source community has sort of a bad reputation to almost being allergic to bringing money into open source.
Hmm.
And I understood that as a developer, as an open source developer. I like open source. I love using open source. I don't like features being gated behind money per se. So what I tried to do from the very start is be very clear that, hey, yeah, I'm going to try and bring money into this project somehow. And so first thing I did was try and sell licenses for money. What I learned there is nobody cares about licenses aside from the lawyers. So developers just want the code, they just want the features. And so I wasn't selling many licenses. So that kind of was a failure. So from there, I said, well, let me try the open core model. And so I announced Sidekiq Pro, and I said that I'm gonna build some additional features that are going to be complex, they are going to be non-trivial to implement, but they will be gated behind a paywall. So if you want access to these features and you want to support the project, you can buy Sidekiq Pro and support the project. And almost from day one of Sidekiq's existence, I had some of those open source developers saying, "Our company is now depending on Sidekiq. We want to pay you money to ensure that you stay around, because as long as our company's around, we're going to depend on Sidekiq, and we're going to depend on you, and so we want you there for us." So it was really positive and invigorating to see that I had dozens of people saying, "Hey, we want to buy this thing, and we want to support you, and we want to support this project." And so, yeah, within I think the first week or two that I had Sidekiq Pro for sale, I got maybe a dozen sales from customers who were already using Sidekiq and wanted to ensure that it was going to be around for the long haul. And so, yeah, some of those customers have been with me for over a decade now.
Wow. Okay. Well, you said that, building a dependable software, and it's great. A lot of a lot of developers, a lot of founders want to do that. But still the fact that you're doing everything alone, right? And this is sometimes a concern for a lot of people. There are a lot of indie makers building, and I can't possibly call you an indie maker anymore, but still, a lot of indie makers are trying to build software and strive for dependable software for something that their customers would use for decades. But the concern there is, you're alone and you're doing everything alone. You're the support, you're the developer, you're the accountant and everything. And if you break a leg, um, then what happens
Or
to
break my
us?
head.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just actually I went surfing today and almost broke my foot, so I'm just like in pain.
Yeah,
That's why.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a common concern. I hear what you're saying. You know, what happens if you get hit by a bus, Mike?
Yeah.
And for commercial software, generally you have like an escrow clause where if the company goes out of business, the
Mhm.
source code will become accessible to the customer so that they can have the, the core IP that their business is relying on available for them to sort of deal with in any sort of emergency. The interesting thing about Ruby is distributed as source code. So there's no precompiled binaries or anything like that. And so that's kind of what I tell customers who are concerned. I say, you know, if you're a Sidekiq Enterprise customer, you have the full Sidekiq Enterprise source code on every
Mhm.
machine that's running it. You know, you can just open the gem package and see the full source code to it. So so yeah, if there's a bug, if you see some behavior that's weird or you want to change, the code's right there. You can the phrase we use in the Ruby community is you can vendor the package and change the code, and you're up and running and everything's working. So yeah, I am, you know, solo. I am alone. Um, but the full source code is available, and Sidekiq is so widely used by the community that you've got, you know, dozens, if not hundreds, of people who are really Sidekiq experts and know the internals pretty well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what
Pretty
I tell
safe.
people if they need yeah, a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds great. But yeah, you went from getting your first customers from the community and from your blog and from people who knew you. But now if you go on the website, you got huge names there, right? So how did you move from, from the community, from the word of mouth, I guess, to those names? Was there any
Yeah.
additional marketing, or was it still very organic?
Here's my secret to marketing. I don't do any marketing.
Yes.
No, so my customer are the Ruby developers that are my peers. That's who I market to, and the way I market it is I make the best, most amazing open source package that I can. Sidekiq, the free project, is my marketing, right? When you use Sidekiq and you say, yeah, this works well, it's really easy to use, it looks great, let's use it. And
Mhm.
so you use it for 6 months or a year, and then you realize, oh, wait a second, I need this feature that is a commercial feature. Maybe we should think about buying it. That's the entirety of my customer acquisition is getting people on Sidekiq and then letting them discover the commercial side and saying, yeah, we need these features, and yeah, we want to support the project to ensure that it sticks around. So let's upgrade. So
Yeah.
yeah, that people almost don't even believe me when I say this, but I do no sales. I do no marketing. Okay. So the only marketing I really do is I go to RubyConf, I go to RailsConf, I put my face out to the developers who go to those conferences. I financially sponsor some of the parties there and that sort of thing, but I don't do any advertising. I don't do any sort of, you know, commercial blog posts that are just outright advertisements sort of thing.
Hmm.
And the only sort of marketing I do is I build an amazing project, and then I document what I do. So I'll publish blog posts about, hey, here's a new feature, and here's something interesting I learned, and that's the that sort of educational bent is really kind of the only sort of public marketing that I do is just telling people, here's what something cool I built in Sidekiq this week or last month or whatever. So yeah, talking
Yeah.
about what I do and the features that I built is essentially the only marketing I do.
All right. Yeah, I went to your blog and like I scrolled down all the way down. And it was like the first one is t 2007 or something. It was like, wow, that's the consistency everyone's talking about. Like that you cannot get it anywhere else, right? Like the it's just it's brilliant. Like when you're consistent, people know where to go to get a kind of content. So, yeah, great stuff. But
The
for
phrase
sure.
in in the music industry is you're a decade old overnight success,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, I'm a huge success, and it only took me 15 years to get here, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's very much a grind. It's very much building up expertise in one specific niche. It's building a solution that solves not only your problem, but a problem that the entire industry may have, and 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 that's sort of the secret, is solve a problem that everybody has, and charge everybody just a little bit of money to access it,
Mm.
and then all of a sudden you're a multi-million dollar business.
All of a sudden, and overnight, you're
Hmm.
yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
really that easy.
yes. Just grind for 15 years and there you go, overnight. But yeah, absolutely. And something that I also noticed, because my previous job was at a tech startup, and it was also open source. And we were just like grinding about like what kind of marketing we can do. And I'm a marketer, so I was grinding about that. And then we just said, yeah, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to talk about like what we're building. And we're not going to like extensively just go and jump or over hopes and just like trying to create this buzz. We're just going to build something brilliant. And I believe it works now. They're way more successful than when I was there. But
I hope those two are unrelated, but yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, to your point, you've got to think about the user. You got to think about your
yeah.
customer. My customer is the Ruby engineer, and the Ruby engineer cares about the features and what value it can bring to their Ruby application. And so that's all that I talk about. Is everything is all my writing is always talking about, here's what you can do with it. Here's how it'll
Hmm.
help you. And all my documentation is set up based on, all the documentation I have is per feature, because I want every developer out there to understand each feature and how it can be useful to their Ruby app. And so, yeah, maybe that's the long-winded way to get to my secret to marketing, is don't talk about yourself, but talk about the 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 customer and how your feature can help them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were just talking about this on another episode, how everyone's right now talking about the benefits, the like what you're going to get, the productivity and the revenue and blah blah blah. And almost nobody anymore talks about the features and like how you actually are going to do that, and how you actually are going to bring the value. And it's getting more and more confusing, and I think it's brilliant when it's a fine line between like what you're getting and how you're getting it. So yeah, really interesting. Once I learn a little bit more about the technicalities, I might go back to your blog and and learn a little bit from you how you're doing this. But yeah, I have obviously a lot more questions, and one of them, because you did a podcast with Toby, one of our co-founders already, an Alpha List, and it was really fascinating that when you were talking about being bootstrapped versus raising funds, and I really like. I think I even wrote it down. The quote of like $500 million in my account is not happiness. Like after bootstrapping a business successfully, building an amazing product, having your community, being well known, there, you said you're not raising funds, and you haven't raised, and well, you sometimes think like what could have been. Could you have been a unicorn by then? So yeah, we're a
Yeah.
question for a tech podcast or like founder podcast, but what is happiness to Mike?
Well, let me get a little philosophical here,
Sure.
because ultimately what you're talking about is, what is your end goal for what you're trying to build? Like, why are you grinding away for a decade?
Exactly.
Um, if you're grinding away from money, I find that what happens is that if you are successful, let's imagine what happens here. If you are successful and you have an exit for, let's say, $50 million, okay, great. Now you're so many years old. You've got a bank account with $50 million. You no longer have access to your business because you sold it. And so what do you have now? You have a very large bank account. You have no job, and nothing really to do anymore. So, and some people will be shouting furiously at me right now is, you got $50 million. But my point is, but yeah, but what does that do for you? Okay, so you can go sit on a beach for the next 20, 30 years, but is that going to make you happy? After the first day or two, then you're just bored. So I don't think people understand that money beyond a certain amount doesn't add happiness or any interesting factors to your life. It once you go beyond $100,000, $200,000 a year and you have food and shelter, then what's more important in life is to have friends and to have a purpose, and money doesn't buy that. So yeah, I for the whole length of the project, money was not necessarily my primary goal. I've always said sustainability is my goal. And that is, I wanted to build my job and my business as something that I could run for the next 20 years and something that would make me content. And that's what I'm doing. And the money is great. Yeah, I'm successful. Um, but at the end of the day, I got an acquisition email just this morning, literally company just saying, hey, are you interested in being acquired? And Tim obviously has approached me several times over the years
Yes.
saying, hey, Mike, you interested in selling out yet? Um, and I keep saying, and I keep coming back to the whole beach thing, which is, okay, so I sell out and I make 20 million, 30 million, whatever. I don't know. But yeah, but what is that going to do for my life now? I won't have a purpose anymore. So Sidekiq and the project gives me a purpose as an engineer who loves to build and support customers. It gives me a job, something to do daily. And so it gives my life meaning. So to sell out for a big number, I would be giving up that purpose a little bit. And so yeah, I struggle with that a little bit. So anyways, that's a very long-winded
Yeah.
philosophical answer to your
No, no, no,
question.
that's great.
So I hope that was somewhat helpful.
No, 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 it's great because again, we talk about this a lot on the podcast, and uh, what all the successful bootstrapped founders are saying is that at first you just have to like come to a conclusion, like why do you need that kind of money? Why do you need to raise VC funds, right? Why do you need to grow that fast? Why do you need to become a unicorn? And then once you've answered that question, you can, yeah, you can make a decision, but ultimately, you need to find your answer that you're at peace with. So yeah, that's I think that
Right.
that's really good. And yet you've sustainably grown a business to, is it five? Because when Toby interviewed you, it was a little over four. Is it five now? 5 million ARR.
It, it's over five. Yeah,
Okay.
it's between 5 and 10. But to my point about earlier, I don't really do any sales or marketing. It's grown organically just over the years. It grows 10, 20, 30% a year, based on the ups and downs of the economy and the ups and downs of the Ruby language as people, you know, build more Ruby on Rails apps. I see more customers as, if the economy goes down a little bit, like it did, post COVID, I'll see a little bit more customer churn, obviously. Um, but yeah, it's just steadily grown like 20% a year, year over year, without me doing much. I just continue to churn out new versions and improvements and fix bugs and maintain the software, and people seem to be happy with it. Sorry, I forgot the gist of your question, but yeah,
No, there wasn't a
it's
question
growing
yet, to
well
be
without me
honest.
doing much.
Oh, that's perfect. I mean, don't we all want to do that? But yeah, the question, I guess, is um, over this period of time. First of all, have you ever wanted a co-founder, someone Because also, what we're talking about here a lot is just the mental health of a founder, of, sometimes being in that bubble and being the only one making the ultimate decisions and being the only one deciding on the roadmap, and, sometimes making hard decisions. So have you ever wanted anybody to join you? And yeah, let's answer that first, and I'll
Yeah.
go to the second part.
So the broader question is sort of, how did I design my business the way it is right now? Because my business is very
And
unusual.
stay sane.
It's not, and stay sane. Um, so as you pointed out, my company is called Contributed Systems. My product is called, or one of my products is called Sidekiq. I have another product called Factory.
Mhm.
But Contributed Systems, I started in 2014 as, an umbrella for the commercial side. And I always sort of designed it from the start to be solo. Um, all of my policies, all of my business policies, all of my billing and sales policies, they are all designed to minimize the administrative side of the business. So, for instance, I make it really, really easy to buy my software with a credit card. And that way I can automate everything, right? I can use Stripe. I can use Stripe subscriptions. You charge a credit card, Stripe starts a subscription, and then every year it just bills your credit card, or every month it bills your credit card. I specifically discourage invoicing, manual invoicing, and sort of manual AR work because I'm solo, and I if every hour I spend trying to bill a customer and trying to track down and get them to pay a bill is one less hour I can focus on the product and the software and supporting my customers. So a lot of my business is designed very much because I intended it to be solo from day one. Now, your question, have you wanted somebody to help? Yes, very much so. Because even though I do sort of discourage invoicing to try and minimize that billing administration, I still have a good number of customers who refuse to use credit cards and they'll only do invoicing. And dealing with them is the biggest pain in the butt in the world. And it's by far the worst part of the job. I absolutely hate it. I'm terrible at it. I'm sometimes rude, can be rude and a little bit brusque with customers who just continue to send me, dozens of emails just for a single sale when they
Mhm.
have the option to pay with a credit card and purchase in 30 seconds and not take up my time. So that part is really frustrating. The administrative side, the paperwork side, um, as an engineer, I'm not good at it. I don't have the patience for it, and so that's why I've designed the company the way it is. But I do wish very much that I had a billing person who could deal with the administrative side for me, and therefore I could just focus on the software.
Okay. All right. So yeah, the second part of the question would be, could you maybe share a hack that, that still helped you over the years uh deal with administrative part of the job, deal with the product, deal with the customers? How do you, yeah, how do you structure your work in the way that you keep an eye on all of the aspects, and still
Mm.
you're, you know, again, coming back to this, stay insane.
Yeah, I don't have a great hack. I mean, the policies that I put in place are my hack, right? So
Mhm.
for instance, if you want to buy Sidekiq Enterprise, it costs X. But if you want to invoice Sidekiq Enterprise, I require a minimum of 3X. So you have to pay three times as
Okay.
much for Sidekiq Enterprise if you want to invoice it. Or that is to say, you have to buy a, the minimum tier is three times higher than if you're just paying with a
Mhm.
credit card. And so that's one hack is this: if you don't like something, charge the customer a lot more for it. I had a bank buy Sidekiq Enterprise 2 days ago, and they were very unhappy that they had to pay 3 times as much because they didn't need a lot of it. They just needed access to the software. But because they refused to use a credit card, I said, well, you're going to have to pay 3 times as much. They were unhappy,
Oh, wow.
but they paid 3 times as much. So that's my hack, I guess, is if something is not fun and kind of dreary, charge a lot of money for
Okay, I think that's one of the best hacks that I've heard on the podcast.
it.
All right.
I'm crying with $20 bills here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, and another question is just something, yeah, something that everybody gets. What's so far the biggest win and the biggest failure for you as a founder
Oh.
or for the business? Let's get philosophical again.
Um, the biggest win. I think when I started Sidekiq, I had a couple of audacious goals that, hey, if I had 3 goals, and if I got all 3 of those goals, I would consider the entire thing a huge success. So my goal was to like get one or more of the big Ruby companies as a customer of Sidekiq. So that was one. And I checked that off. Like, I think a couple of the big companies at the time were New Relic, Basecamp, GitHub, Shopify, um, and 3 of those 4 companies are customers. So, huge success there. The second goal was to make $1 million. Obviously, check. That's like every year now. Um, and then the third was to what was the third? Oh, to have a background job system that Ruby developers um, name first. When they're talking about background jobs, Sidekiq should be the first name that they name. And that's also true now too. So I've achieved all those goals and I've blown past several of them. So that's the huge success. The failure
Oh.
um, was, I've started other products. I had a product called Inspector a few years ago that I built, and I was really enthusiastic about it. It sort of filled a niche that I had always been felt was kind of a pain to deal with, and it sold nothing. Just other people didn't buy it, or it didn't have the community behind it. So I killed that product off after, probably a year just because it wasn't seeing any uptake. So that was the failure is, as a company, you have one big product and then you try and fan out and build other products. And, oftentimes your second or third product just won't be as successful as the first product. That's just life. That's the way it works. You think of bands who put out a first great album and then their second album is a huge flop, right? And it happens. I mean, it's literally called the second album syndrome or something like that, because it happens in all walks of life. You have one huge hit, and then you go on and you think you're going to do amazing on the second time around, and it doesn't work. So it is what it is, but it happens to
Yeah.
everybody. So I don't feel too hard about it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I think we talked about that with David Heinemeier Hansen, and he said the same thing. He was just like, "Do you think all of our products were as good as Basecamp? Absolutely not." And there went like a list of of the like
Yeah,
failed products, and yeah, not everything is going to be a huge success, and that's okay.
absolutely true. Yeah, 37 Signals probably had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 different SaaS products, and I think they've basically sunsetted everyone except for
Yeah.
Basecamp itself, just because that's sort of they decided was going to be their bread and butter. And I can respect that. Sort of, I've thought about building different products and going different directions, and at the end of the day, Sidekiq is still 95% of my business. And so I have to focus on Sidekiq, and that's where I spend the bulk of my time because that's where most of my customers are and that's where the money's coming from. So that's, you get what you pay for, and my customers are paying for Sidekiq, and so that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for, for the story. It's been absolutely incredible. Yeah, I really appreciate that Tim introduced us, Tim Schumacher, our co-founder at saas Group. He was absolutely right. I was absolutely excited. So, and yeah, that's just another, another reason to go deeper into tech maybe. So yeah, thank you so much for your story. And yeah, I'm really fascinated to see where you're going to be next year.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the talk. And yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, thank you and take care.